welcome to Exploring with the Estuarium. My name is Ariel and I'll be your educator. Today we're going to learn about taxonomy and how we group animals of the Puget Sound.
During this lesson, you will become familiar with Puget Sound marine organisms, how they are classified, and how they have adapted to their environment. The Puget Sound is the largest estuary by volume of water and the second largest estuary by shoreline in the United States. What is an estuary? An estuary is a place where fresh water from the rivers and streams meet with the salt water of the ocean. Within our estuary system, we have an intertidal zone ecosystem that supports a diversity of marine life. What is the intertidal ecosystem? Here in Washington, there are 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day. The intertidal zone is the coastal area that is above water during low tide and below water during high tide. This ecosystem can offer many different types of habitats, from rocky shores to sandy beaches and mudflats. Different animals live in these different habitats and have adapted physical characteristics to help them live there. Organisms adapt or change over time. One small change or mutation in an individual organism, perhaps the color or size change, for example, can be passed on to its offspring if it survives long enough to reproduce. If the individuals with the trait continue to survive and reproduce, the trait can be passed on to each subsequent generation. If the adaptation is beneficial to the organisms that have this trait, it will help them to survive in their ecosystem. The trait will continue to be passed on, and more individuals in this species will have this trait. Adaptations are furthered in populations by natural selection. The tree of life shows the evolutionary process of natural selection. This metaphor is used as a model to explore the evolution of life and describe the relationships between organisms. The tree is built upon evolutionary history and how groups split from each other, resulting in different characteristics. Where the groups split is the point in history that they shared a common ancestor. The farther apart the branches are from one another, the less likely the 2 groups are to be related or look similar. There are many ways to group living things into categories. Before we try this with animals, let's see if we can make some quick decisions about how to group or sort some familiar objects into smaller categories that make sense. In this picture, you see many different types of money, coins, and bills alike. These are not all American money. There are many ways you could classify this money. You have 30 seconds to come up with as many categories as you can. Start with broad groups and work your way down to very specific groups. To start, you could group the currency by country of origin, then split it into bills and coins, and further split the groups up by the amount the currency represents. Scientists do this when classifying animals. Scientists can group animals based on what they look like and their adaptations. Taxonomy is a science of defining and naming groups of organisms based on shared characteristics. There are multiple taxonomic levels. Broad levels, such as a domain, have many members with few similarities. Specific levels, such as a genus, have very few members with many shared similarities. A domain is the highest and most broad taxonomic rank. All life forms can be classified into a domain. Since 1990, there are 3 domains: archaea, which are one-celled organisms with membranes composed of branched hydrocarbon chains; bacteria, which are one-celled organisms that have a substance called peptoglycan that forms their cell wall; and eukarya, one or multi-celled organisms with their genetic material organized in a nucleus. A kingdom is a subdivision of a domain. Eukarya kingdoms include Animalia, Plantae, and fungi. A phylum is a major subdivision of an organism's kingdom. Some phyla of the animal kingdom are Arthropoda, Chordata, and Mollusca. Class is a major subdivision of the organism's phylum. The order is a major subdivision of the organism's class. The family is a major subdivision of the organism's order. And a genus is a major subdivision of an organism's family or subfamily and usually consists of more than one species. The standards for genus classification are not strictly defined. However, most of them, the numbers of members in a genus is reasonably compact. The members of a genus share a common ancestor, and the members of a genus are distinct. A species is a very specific classification. Usually when talking about plants and animals, we start at the level of kingdom. To remember the taxonomic levels, all you have to do is remember the saying, King Philip came over for good soup. Let's practice our new skills by learning the taxonomic levels of an orca. Orcas are an animal, so they are part of the kingdom Annelida. Their phylum is a large group of animals that have backbones, called chordates, or the Chordata phylum. Orcas belong to the class of animals that are endotherms, or warm-blooded, and have mammary glands and also give live births. They belong to the class Mammalia, or mammals. Orcas are aquatic, which means they are in the Cetacea order. The family is a little tricky, since the orca is also known as the killer whale. They are part of the Delphinidae family, or dolphin family. Orcas are the only species in its genus that is not extinct. Their genus is Orcinus. Finally, their species is a pretty easy one. It's orca. Only 3% of all animals are chordates, or have a backbone, and the other 97% are invertebrates, or have no backbone. During some period of their life cycle, chordates have a notochord, a dorsal nerve cord, pharyngeal slits, an endostyle, and a postanal tail. What this means is that this group of animals has a skeletal rod that supports the body and has a central nervous system. In humans, this is our backbone and spinal cord. Pharyngeal slits are gills. In humans and other terrestrial animals, that develops into a jaw and inner ear. The endostyle corresponds to the thyroid, and the postanal tail is the tail that sticks out the back end of animals and is the tailbone in humans. Let's take a closer look at the phylum Echinodermata. Echinoderms include sea stars, sea cucumbers, sea urchins, and sand dollars. Echinoderms are characterized by radial symmetry and several arms radiating from a central body. Sea stars have many adaptations. Here we see a purple or ochre sea star, a mottled sea star, and leather sea star. They are keystone species, or species which other species in the ecosystem largely depend on. And if they were removed, the ecosystem might collapse. Sea stars specialize in eating mussels. They have a number of adaptations that help them be the best mussel eater. One of the biggest is their tube feet, which look like white suction cups sticking off of each arm. They can pry open live mussels just using their tube feet. Another adaptation that helps sea stars eat mussels is their stomach, or rather their two stomachs. Sea stars can stick their first stomach outside of their body and into the mussel to dissolve the tissue, and uses the second stomach to fully digest the prey. The tube feet also function as their nose, and they can smell with all of their feet. This is the main way they hunt. But they can also see. They have tiny eye spots on the end of each arm. Sea stars don't see like us. They can see if it is light or dark, but it lets them get a picture of what is around them and helps them avoid predators. Next, we have the phylum Cnidaria. Cnidarians include anemones, jellyfish, and coral. They all have tentacles with stinging cells and only have two body layers, the ectoderm and the endoderm, separated by a jelly-like layer called the mesoglea. At the estuarium, we have plumose and painted anemones. They are an invertebrate, which means they have no backbone or spine, which is unlike humans, who are chordates or part of the chordatas, which have a spine. The main adaptation of all anemones is a special type of cell called a cnidocyte. Cnide for nettle and cyte for cell. They are the stinging cells of all anemones, jellies, and corals. They use them to feed. Whenever the prey, such as fish, brush against their tentacles, the stinging cells, shaped like harpoons, release and grab hold of the prey. Then the anemone will use the tentacles to bring it closer to their mouth, which is at the center of the anemone. They avoid being eaten because 1. They sting, and 2. They have little to no nutritional value. Arthropoda, or arthropods, are the largest phylum in the animal kingdom, which includes such familiar forms as lobsters, crabs, spiders, mites, insects, centipedes, and millipedes. They are characterized by having an exoskeleton, jointed limbs, and segmented bodies. This is our northern kelp crab, Mr. Snappy, who is a male. You can tell the difference between a male and a female crab by looking at the shape of their tail flap located on their underside. Males have a triangle or lighthouse-shaped tail, and females have a round tail that covers most of their underside because that is where they brood their eggs. Northern kelp crabs are omnivores and eat seaweed and other animals. They have many adaptations for helping to get their food. One is their spider-like legs that help them climb kelp or piers. Kelp crabs use their legs to grip and get around to search for food while also avoiding predators. One of their major adaptations is their claws, which are located in the front and help to ward off predators, fight males for territory, and use them to bring food to their mouth, which is also highly adapted. Kelp crab mouths are made up of many smaller legs that cut or grind the food, just like our teeth. Another adaptation kelp crabs have is their hard carapace or exoskeleton, which helps protect them from predators looking to make them food. Annelida are commonly referred to as segmented worms and are found all over the world from the deepest marine sediments to the soil in your yard. Annelids are all bilaterally symmetric and have segmented organs. This is a ragworm. They get their name from the ragged fringe of flat legs called parapodia along the sides of their bodies. The ragworm uses these to crawl, swim, and breathe. They work like the gills of a fish to take in oxygen from the water. Ragworms often live in burrows beneath the surface of the sand. The ragworm is a fierce hunter and seizes prey with its strong pincher-like jaws. Lastly, we're going to look at the phylum Mollusca. Mollusca means soft body. Mollusk animals are sea snails, bivalves, and chitons. They all have the following adaptations in common: soft body, one or more shells usually, a mantle that covers the internal organs and typically secretes a shell, a foot, and bilateral symmetry. Oysters are mollusks, which means that they are related to animals like octopus, clams, and snails. Oysters are also bivalves, meaning that they have two shells. The shells of the oysters grow as the oyster grows. Oysters spend 3 to 4 weeks drifting as plankton before they find a hard place to settle and continue growing. Once settled, they begin to filter feed on microscopic animals, plants, and bacteria that live in the seawater. The more an oyster eats, the more energy it must build and strengthen its shell using calcium carbonate. It can take up to 3 years for an oyster to reach the size of 4 to 6 inches long. The Pacific oyster can grow to over 10 inches long and live up to 40 years. Their shells help to protect them from predators and also helps keep water in during low tide so that the oysters are still able to get oxygen. Estuaries are some of the most biologically productive ecosystems in the world. Estuaries are ideal habitats for thousands of different plants and animal species. You are connected to an estuary. Your watershed eventually drains into an estuary, so what you and your family do on land and how you take care of your water affects your estuary. Your actions make a difference.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Exploring with the Estuarium. If you liked our video, give it a thumbs up. And if you wish to continue to get more of our educational videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Facebook at the Puget Sound Estuarium. Bye!